Thank you, Mr. Manager, Mayor, Council members. Thank you for inviting me today to be here in Peachtree City. I have to share with you, as I was coming from the hotel, I had a Lyft driver. His name was Electro Man. He is a 24-year resident of your city, and from the time the door closed at the hotel to the time we were here in the parking lot, he was raving about your city. Just, you know, a great ambassador for your community. And he was talking about how he raised his family here, how happy he was here. He lost his wife about a year ago, but he has no reason to leave, and just a great ambassador and very inspiring you know, for that short ride over here. So today with me is Dr. Rachel Levinstein. She is our Director of Survey Research. I'm going to turn this over to her at this point. She's going to give you a rundown of the survey results, and I'll chime in at different points as we go along. So, Rachel, all yours.
All right. Thank you, Lee, and thank you for having us here today. I'm looking forward to presenting your results from April to July of this year. And I'm just going to jump right into this. If there are any questions, please feel free to jump in. As kind of a quick overview, the Zencity Community Survey is a recurring survey that looks at quality of life and satisfaction with community characteristics. I'm going to share my screen because I now realize I was not sharing my screen. Here we go. All right. A bit about the methodology that we used. We recruited 744 respondents using a combination of social media, mobile app advertising, local websites, and survey panels between April and July of this year. The city also collected an additional 1,190 responses using the city's own distribution efforts, including printed surveys, and those were used to supplement the recurring surveys. The way that we incorporated that was with the open text questions. The way that we built our representative sample was by starting with the census estimates to get a sense of what demographic groups are represented in Peachtree City. We identified, for example, how many men, how many women, how many in each age group, and how many by race and ethnicity we should expect in a representative sample. As our responses were coming in, we watched as people identified themselves by in each of these demographic categories. And once we had kind of filled those buckets in our quota sample, we closed the survey, and then we used a process called rake weighting to further adjust the data so that no demographic group was overrepresented or underrepresented in the data. All right. So I'm going to start with our metric on overall satisfaction. And this is a combination of different questions that we asked. We asked a series of 3 questions about quality of life, and then we asked a series of questions about community characteristics. I'm going to go into each of these questions in a few slides, but this overall satisfaction metric, to get that, we took the average of the quality of life scores, the average of the community characteristics, we took the average of that, and then assigned it a positive, neutral, or negative score. So what we're seeing in Peachtree City is...
I'm sorry. Yeah? If you can just speak a little bit slower.
Sure, I'm sorry. What we found in Peachtree City is that 92% of residents were satisfied with life in Peachtree City. And I want to pause here and just emphasize that I've never seen scores this high before in any of the clients that we've served. This is an exceptionally satisfied population you have. 0% were dissatisfied.
And I'm sorry, Rachel, I think when you spoke a little bit faster, there was some confusion on why the number was 744. Could you go back to explain the buckets?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way that we collect our data is using what's called quota sampling. We start with targets. We know that there's a certain percentage of men, a certain percentage of women in Peachtree City, a certain percentage of people from age 18 to 34, 35 to 54, and 55 and over. And we also have similar targets for race and ethnicity. So as the responses are coming in, we watch as they're coming in to see if these quotas are being met, see if these buckets are being filled. And then once we fill those buckets, we have a reasonably representative sample, but we still have to go one step further and use a process called rake weighting to further adjust the data. Does that help?
Yeah, Dr. Levinston, the process was called what again? What was that term you just said to further analyze it?
It's called rake weighting.
Rake is in the, like the garden tool.
Thank you.
Rake.
Can
Thank you.
Can she explain that? How you,
Let's let her get through the
Yes, ma'am.
presentation, and then maybe we'll have questions after that.
Okay.
Rake.
All right. So as I mentioned before, the satisfaction score was quite high. 92% of residents were satisfied and 0% were not satisfied. And then when we look at the quality of life questions, these top 3 questions are about quality of life. 88% of residents were satisfied with the overall quality of life in Peachtree City. 83% said that they were likely to recommend Peachtree City as a place to live. And 75% said that they were likely to be living in Peachtree City 5 years from now. I'm going to show you all of the community characteristics we asked about. I think there are about about 10. And when you take the average of the scores from the community characteristics, how satisfied people were with each of these characteristics, 90% of residents were satisfied on the whole with the community characteristics. So we wanted to break this down by demographics so you can kind of see, what does the city look like in terms of satisfaction? And we do see some differences by age, where younger residents are slightly less satisfied than older residents. Almost everyone in the 55 and over category are satisfied, and 86%, which is also quite high, I do want to emphasize, were satisfied. When we look at level of education, people who have a high school degree or less are slightly less satisfied than those with at least some college. But again, 86% is still a very high score. We don't see any differences by race or ethnicity or by gender, and income, only very slight differences across income categories. Okay, so now I'm going to turn to the community characteristics. And so on this slide and also on the next slide, I'm going to show you each of the community characteristics, and the green bar represents the percent who are satisfied. The gray dots, the number by the gray dot, represents the percent who are neutral, and the red dot is the percent that's dissatisfied. And we sorted them by most satisfied to least satisfied. There's, again, another slide after this. Almost everybody is satisfied with the access to quality education, the sense of overall safety, and 87% were satisfied with overall cleanliness and maintenance. In the interest of time, I'm going to kind of skip to the areas where people were a little less satisfied. 27% reported being satisfied with the availability of affordable housing, and 36% reported being dissatisfied with this. And I wanted to just pause a moment with this and just emphasize that every community across the country is dealing with issues around housing at this time. Towards the end of the presentation, I'm going to show you where Peachtree City falls relative to cities like yours and also the U.S. as a whole. So you'll be able to kind of compare, what does this 27% look like for other cities? Is it higher? Is it lower? 41% said that they were satisfied with the availability of jobs that pay a living wage. This is also an area where a lot of communities are struggling across the country. 45% said that they were satisfied with the ability of residents to give input to the Peachtree City government, and 22% were dissatisfied. So this is a lot of information, and we wanted to kind of distill it a little bit and pick out a couple of community characteristics that are strongly related to overall satisfaction and that have a notably high score or a notably low score. Now, in Peachtree City, there aren't a lot of notably low scores, and those low scores are not related so much to overall satisfaction. But this strength area, this area that's high scoring, was access to quality education. Almost everyone was satisfied with this. So this is an area where we would say, keep doing what you're doing. Although, you know, in all honesty, I think there are a lot of areas where we could say that Peachtree City can just keep doing what it's doing. The focus area, the area that's relatively low scoring, but does have this strong relationship to overall satisfaction, was the sense of community among residents. But I also wanted to point out here that it's still pretty high at 72%. Okay. So let's kind of dive into this strength area where residents are satisfied with access to quality education. We don't see a ton of variation. We do see a little bit of variation by income. 85% of residents with incomes under 50,000 were satisfied, compared to 93 and 95% of the middle and upper income categories. By race and ethnicity, we do see that white residents are a little bit more satisfied than other residents in the city. And we don't see any difference in satisfaction here for households that do or do not have children under the age of 18 in the household. Okay. And then turning to the focus area, this is the area that is a little bit lower scoring, but is still in Peachtree City quite high. 72% of residents are satisfied with a sense of community among residents. And we don't see any differences by age group. We see that white residents are slightly more satisfied than Black or Latino residents, and homeowners are slightly less satisfied than those who are renting. Okay, I'm gonna talk about what this kind of means and just sort of put this into some context here. So we conducted a national benchmark survey to try to gauge how is the US feeling about these same community characteristics. And we also wanted to identify cities that are similar to yours on some objective metrics. And create scores for each. So we wanted to compare you to the US, but also to cities like yours. So we conducted a survey of over 6,000 US residents across over 1,000 communities. We used the combined estimates from this to create scores for the US. And to find the cities like yours, what we did was use a process called principal components analysis and cluster analysis to kind of group cities together using census data. So thinking about population density, median income, population size, demographics. So we kind of automatically created these buckets, these cohorts of cities. And then we created a score that was the average from those cities. And these are some of the communities that are represented in your cohort. So we're not going to be comparing to individual cities, we're comparing to all of the cities in your cohort. So the other cities are Tucker, Georgia, Estero, Florida, McDonough, Georgia, Lutz, Florida, and Hilton Head Island in South Carolina. And you can see it's not ever going to be a perfect match. Population density varies, total population varies, Lutz is quite small. Median income is much higher than in some of the other communities here. But overall, the cities in this cohort kind of mesh together. So I'm going to turn this over to Lee to kind of talk through the benchmark results and put them into some context.
Thank you, Rachel. So I get to deliver the really good news, okay? And that is that Peachtree City excels compared to the national sample and the cohort sample in almost every category. Here, where we look at overall resident satisfaction, the three characteristics, you can see with that blue dot that Peachtree City is not even close. Okay, there's nobody close to Peachtree City in these areas, which is really good, which explains why you had the high satisfaction levels in the beginning when we talked about that 0% that said that they were not satisfied. So again, we haven't seen scores like this. Rachel, if we go to the next page, this is where we get into the specific specific characteristics. And again, you can see that in almost every category, you are leading the way on there, including like in public transportation. So I sort of debated that. What do we mean by public transportation? There's clearly not a mass transit system here, but your public transportation system is your golf cart paths, okay, something that you're known for. And your residents here, really give that as a really high attribute as a way to get around, because that's what transportation systems are all about, making it easy for people to get around. Where the two areas where you weren't the clear leader, one was on affordable housing, and one was on arts and entertainment type venues, cultural affairs. The first one, affordable housing, I wouldn't lose any sleep over it in terms of the fact that you're grouped with everybody there. And matter of fact, I'd tell you that means what you're doing in terms of housing, you should probably continue. Right? We know housing is a big issue nationwide. Affordability is defined differently for every community. It's factors in terms of housing prices versus income versus insurance and mortgage insurance and rates and all those different factors that go into it. Here we see that you're with everybody else. And so, you're not lagging behind as we see a lot of cities that we do work with. So you should take some good solace there. The second is on the arts and cultural activities. I don't know what level of arts and cultural activities you have here, but this may be one of the areas that you want to focus on. If you have enough, maybe it's the messaging. Maybe it's making sure that they're tied with the community needs and wants. So that would be an area that, as manager, I would go back and look at based upon these survey results. Then we get to our next slide, which is, Rachel, the free text responses. And this is where we put together a word cloud based upon all the open-ended questions that we got. And again, golf carts and paths, number one that people are talking about. And the negative, as we're experiencing in any urban, suburban interfaced area, is traffic, intersections. Apparently, restaurants are a little bit of a concern, but something that may be outside of the control of the city. So this gives us a way of getting all that data inputted in graphic. And now I'll turn it back to Rachel for the balance.
All right, thank you, Lee. We also added a couple of questions to the end, and we wanted to show you the overall distribution of responses there. So the first question is about city accountability. So we asked residents to rate whether, to what extent Peachtree City government operates in a way that is open and accountable to the public. And we see that about 44% of residents agree with this. And there's some variation by demographics. So younger residents are a little bit more likely to endorse this than older residents. We see that middle-income residents are slightly less likely to support this, but it's not a very large difference. And we see that women are a little bit more likely to endorse it than men. We also asked if the Peachtree City government listens to residents and is responsive to their concerns. 39% of residents agreed with that, and we did see some slight patterns here. It was a little bit lower in the middle income category, and a little bit higher among Hispanic and Latino residents. And we did see some slight differences by gender, but these are not terribly large differences. So I wanted to address something that has come up before, and that's about our representative sample compared to the over 1,000 responses that Peachtree City collected. We wanted to kind of talk about this a little bit and just kind of show you why we do what we do in terms of representation. Here what I'm showing is the quality of life questions under our distribution and the city's distribution. And what you can see is kind of a clear pattern. The city distribution, the over 1,000 responses, are consistently higher than the representative sample. And so when I was looking at this, I was wondering, well, why can that be? Why is this a little bit higher? And so we dived into the demographics. And so as I mentioned earlier, when we build a representative sample, we start with these census estimates. So looking at the adults in Peachtree City, about 20% of them are 18 to 34 from the U.S. Census, and 36% are in age 35 to 54, and 44% are in the 55 and over category. And so when we did our representative collection, we were about 24% of our sample was in this younger age category, 33% were in the middle age category, and 39% were in the older category. So it was pretty close. We never get it perfectly right, but it is pretty close. And we look at it across demographics, and it's fairly close in all categories. When we look at the city distribution, the big difference here is in the age category. So what we're seeing is that while 20% of the adult population in Peachtree City is age 18 to 34, the percent of the sample that the city built was at 4%. And we do see some overrepresentation in the older age categories. So what we do with the representative sample is we try to hear from all portions of the population and give everyone a voice here. And so I just kind of wanted to demonstrate this as kind of an exercise to talk about the representative sample. So I'm going to stop here. This is the end of my presentation. We've included the questionnaire at the end for your records, and I'm happy to take any questions.